Before we move on to Tom's final report, we have a message from Sir Vince. Sir Vince Caitlin couldn't make it today, but he does want to share his thoughts with us. So could you do that briefly, please?
Well, can I first of all give my apologies for not coming to the conference this afternoon. I think when I accepted the invitation, we thought that Brexit would be done and dusted, but we're still living this nightmare. And my diary has been completely torn up as a consequence. But can I just say that it is very important that we continue to have people looking at Brexit in an academic and scientific way. There's too much raw emotion, too much not listening. I think the importance of sounding evidence and analysis is crucial. I think we do understand from the economic data that there is a very clear conclusion that staying in the European Union is economically the most advantageous arrangement we have relative to all the various forms of Brexit. What is not properly explored, I think, so far is the constitutional issue. We have this massive debate going on at the moment between the rights of the public shredded in a plebiscite and the status of Parliament, and how these two forces are to be balanced against the executive and the Prime Minister. A lot of constitutional textbooks are being torn up at the moment, and I think having some sober analysis of what's going on and where it leads would be very useful. But good wishes for your conference, and I look forward to participating in some of your future events. Thank you.
Okay. Well, on that note, what we are pleased to say is that in lieu of Sir Vince, no disrespect to Tom, of course, Tom Brake MP is the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Brexit, so in many ways it's even more apposite, I guess. So Tom, thank you for coming out here today, and fresh from Parliament, I do believe. So welcome to the
So what happened is that by a majority of 58 this time, the Prime Minister's deal was defeated. So 230 votes the first time, 149 the second time, and 58 this time, albeit on a slightly different basis. So we had meaningful vote 1, meaningful vote 2. This is probably meaningful vote 2.5. And if the Prime Minister tries to bring back a meaningful vote, it will end up being meaningful vote 3.5, I suspect. So I wouldn't rule out perhaps the prospect or the possibility of her still doing that. So I guess the worst case scenario for me as a Liberal Democrat, and I'm afraid I'm not going to give you an unbiased speech this afternoon, the worst case scenario is that we end up with no deal. And certainly the demonstrators outside Parliament were cheering the result. And these were people with leave banners, because they see that actually the vote that we just had might be one of the ways of securing a no-deal scenario for them. And it's very clear that there are a number of very senior Conservative politicians, including people like Bob Levin, who believe that the Prime Minister will deliver no deal. That if she's pushed into a corner, that she would actually deliver that, and Oliver has said that in speeches in the Chamber. And that is notwithstanding all of the stories, and Vernon referred to some of them in terms of food shortages and medicine shortages. I agree that some of them may be overinflated, and some of the preparations that are being made on the basis of not quite the worst case scenario, but the most realistic worst case scenario. But even if half of what is being planned for were actually to happen in a no-deal scenario, I suggest that would be a very bad thing for the United Kingdom. We drove down to near Canterbury at the weekend, because that's where my mother-in-law lives, and if you drive down the M20, you will see what some of those preparations are. Down one lane of the M20 now, between the 3 lanes and the hard shoulder, in the middle, there is an aluminium barrier that stretches the length of the M20. That is because in a no-deal scenario where Dover stops functioning, that becomes the motorway, and the other lanes on the other side become the lorry park. So the whole of the M20, or one side of it at least, becomes devoted to being a lorry park, along with Manston Airport, which doesn't operate as an airport anymore, but is a nice open space with space to park up lots of lorries. So I do fail to understand why there are some members of Parliament, not that many. One of the votes a couple of days ago, which tested this, had 160 MPs voting for, in effect, no deal, and 400 voting against. So there is an appetite for it, but it's clearly not a majority of MPs who believe that no deal is the right way to go. For me now, the best case scenario is that the process that Oliver Letwin started on Wednesday continues on Monday. That is agreed. And then that process is continued on Wednesday as well. So the idea is that the process we went through a couple of days ago, which identified that there were some options that, yes, didn't command a majority, but actually came a lot closer to commanding a majority than the Prime Minister's deal, which, bearing in mind, that's something that's been worked on for 1,000 days, and that was day one of this new attempt to find a way forward. The two options that came out on top, the most popular, albeit, as I said, not with a majority, were a people's vote and revoke. Those were the two most popular proposals that came up with the Customs Union as well. So what we're now trying to do is to find a way of taking the support that exists for perhaps the Customs Union, possibly linking it in some way to the Prime Minister's deal, compositing the motion, which clearly the Labour MPs are much more familiar with than the Democrats. They clearly spent quite a lot of time compositing things at trade union or party conferences. So compositing is in a way that you can get together the people who supported the idea of a customs union with the people who supported the people's vote, put it all together, and suddenly you get a majority. And that is what is being worked on. It might not just be the customs union, it might have other components added to it, but I think there's a reasonable prospect that at the end of Monday we will actually emerge with something that a majority, albeit possibly a small majority of MPs, have voted for, in contrast to the Prime Minister's deal, which has just gone down by 58 votes. Now, there are of course questions about how credible is what we come up with on Monday going to be. Clearly, and many have argued, I think, with some justification, that the Ken Clark put forward the Customs Union proposal, that it was at best something that had been written on the back of the fact packet in terms of the detail that's contained within it. But perhaps linking it to the Prime Minister's deal, you could see something emerge. So I hope something emerges on Monday. That is critical, because what we need to do by the end of next week is have something concrete that we can offer the European Union. Because one of the questions earlier was about what does this mean in terms of an extension. What it means is that the extension that we had been offered until the 22nd of May, if the deal had passed, is now no longer available, because the deal hasn't been passed by today at 11 PM. So what we are now facing is we leave on the 12th of April. We leave on the 12th of April if by the meeting on the 10th of April, we have not got something concrete and credible to offer in terms of this is where the UK government, so that requires the Prime Minister to buy in, there's a question mark about that, but certainly this is the way the UK Parliament believes we can now proceed. There is no doubt whatsoever that that will require a long extension, 9 months perhaps. And as a party, the Lib Dems, and thank you, Vernon, for confirming that that is something as a party we've been campaigning on since the day after the referendum nearly 3 years ago, that we would want to see that as part of that or included in that extension, a people's vote or referendum that we do need to legislate for it, of course. Now, we think that, and other sort of independent parties have confirmed that it might be possible to do something like that within 22 weeks. At a push. And so that's the sort of timescale that we're thinking. So an extension from the EU up to 9 months, say, but we accept that would actually require the UK to participate in the European elections. As a party, we are committed to doing that, and we are putting in place the things that are needed for that to happen in terms of selecting candidates. Now, I understand the government, yesterday I think there were some reports in the press that the government have actually asked returning officers to start thinking about that eventuality. So it's not just us as a party, it seems that the government are starting to think that might be something that is required. And although I agree that fighting European elections after a referendum which hasn't delivered Brexit will be a challenge. And clearly there is the risk that Mr Farage gets re-elected with a large number of his new Brexit MEPs in the European Parliament, and clearly that is not something that Mr Verhofstadt and others will enjoy particularly. I mean, they may be joined, of course, again, as Vernon indicated, by a rather large number of rather unattractive populists from other parts of Europe. But what we see the European elections potentially as being is perhaps for the first time elections that are actually about Europe. Because I confess, even for the Liberal Democrats, the recent European elections have rarely been about Europe. I think every party, even a party as pro-European as ours, has taken a bit of a step back in terms of how we fought European elections, and have often gone out of our way to try to link the European elections to national things. So actually, this is an election about health or education or crime, and here's the link to European Union. This might actually be the first election that has been fought on European values, why we're part of the European Union, what we derive in benefits. Yes, there are problems associated with it as well. So for us as a party, if it becomes a contest between Mr Farage's party and the Remainers, who, incidentally, you may have noticed that the UK now has the largest, most active, most mobilised pro-European movement anywhere in the European Union, 1 million people who marched in London a couple of weekends ago. No other country in Europe can match that in terms of a group of people who now feel sufficiently motivated about the values, European values and European cooperation, to actually go out and march in the street, come down from all parts of the country to do that. And that may provide some interesting sort of activists for us as a party if we get into European elections where it will be Nigel Farage who wants to take us out, and the Democrats who want to keep us in, and the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, frankly, who will, clearly they're not keen on European elections because it's going to be very, very difficult for them to come up with a manifesto that their parties are going to support universally, because they are fundamentally split on the issue. But we would, in some respects, welcome that. So we have the European elections to fight, and of course we have the referendum to fight, and that pass the legislation and then fight the referendum, and of course with no certainty that we would win it, and certainly no certainty that we would win it by the convincing margin that was referred to earlier, which might put the issue to bed for some time. You know, however large, if we were to have the referendum and we were to win it, however large that margin is, of course, there's absolutely no guarantee that we won't come back to this issue in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years' time anyway, because things can move in terms of people's views about the European Union. Now, just very briefly, just to finish, in terms of worst-case scenario longer term, I think many of you will have noticed that already the UK has lost a huge degree of influence. It's certainly lost a huge degree of credibility. I do not come across anyone talking to European diplomats or friends from the European Union, or indeed people from beyond the European Union, who have any real understanding or comprehension of what it is that we are doing and why we're doing it, and what benefit we think we're going to derive from it. We're certainly not going to derive huge benefits from a trade point of view. Of course, 11 PM today was Brexit Day, Independence Day, and 1 minute past, or possibly 1 second past, it was also going to be the day when Liam Fox was going to deliver the rollover of all of these 40 trade deals. Well, he might get to about 8 or 9 of them, and any of you who saw Channel 4 News last night will know that actually, or will have heard, that of those 8 or 9, actually they're not the same as the ones that the UK has through the European Union. Actually, they're scaled down in terms of their impact, but many of the larger trade deals are nowhere near being resolved, because of course what this has done is opened up those trade deals So countries like South Korea and Japan are now saying, well, actually, we did negotiate that with the European Union, but if it's going to be a trade deal between us and the UK, actually, we want something different. And therefore, the convenient rollover that he has sold to people that was going to happen at 1 minute past 11 tonight is simply not going to happen. So we're not going to get that huge economic benefit. All the analysis confirms that economically we're going to do more, our economy is going to grow more slowly as a result of this, and if you don't believe me, just listen to the Prime Minister. Every time she is asked the question, Prime Minister, can you confirm that we're going to be better off under your deal? She will always phrase it in a way which you just have to read between the lines. She's saying, no, I accept that actually any model of Brexit leaves us poorer than staying in the European Union. Our Prime Minister accepts that, of course. She campaigned for Remain, and that was partly, I guess, the reason why she did. So the worst case scenario leaves us with less influence, we're more isolated. I think economically we're going to suffer as a result. We're not going to get the big trade deals because, of course, we are at a disadvantage sitting down with the US on the other side of the negotiating table, China, India, wherever it might be. They've got more clout than we have. Best case scenario, I guess, is that if we do take that decision to stay in the European Union, then I think we can start to rebuild our credibility. We can start to rebuild the benefits that we get, or reassert the benefits that we get from being part of the European Union, where we do, as a result of that, I would argue, punch above our weight in a way that we can't do if we're by ourselves. We can start at an EU level to address some of the real challenges that the European Union faces. Russia, which I think is a real sort of ongoing challenge. Climate change, which the European Union will drive the solution to that to a great extent, and also collectively try to address some of the populism that is rife within the European Union, trying to find a way of addressing that. So probably I want to finish there. So I've given you literally come hot from Parliament. Very happy to explain as far as I can what's going on, and perhaps just to finish by saying that I think at a moment like this, it's critical that the different parties work together, because I think one of the problems of this whole process was that at the outset, our Prime Minister only sought to work with her own party and the DUP. If you add those numbers together, she could only just get anything that she'd agreed over the line, but surely she would have known that to try to get all of her Conservative members of Parliament around one deal, and one deal alone, was never going to happen, because the range of views within the Conservative Party span no deal to people who are as strong in campaigning for Remain as me. But we are working cross-party. There are negotiations, discussions that go on at all times between, and will be, have been today, will do over the weekend, to try to pull together a solution for Monday, which involves all the political parties, except the DUP so far, but maybe even perhaps over the weekend they may decide to come on board, because actually for the DUP, many of them are saying that actually the union is more important to them than the Prime Minister's deal. And actually, if you read between the lines of what they're actually saying they prefer to stay in the European Union than they would to go for the Prime Minister's deal. Thank you.
We're nearly at an end now, but I'm going to start over here. I'll just read the question around here.
So given the fact that the House hasn't been able to come to any kind of majority on anything lately, yes, it's going to be more difficult next week, but for all we know, there could be just a whole bunch of votes again. Do you think there's a chance in a couple of weeks' time, on the 10th of April, if we don't manage to go back to the EU with any kind of prospect, that the MPs who voted against the deal today, including yourself, might regret it, and think that perhaps it would be better just to go ahead with the deal, even if it was a bad one, rather than leaving with no deal, which is the worst case scenario?
Okay. Shall we take a couple more? Yeah. Diving in there straight away. A couple more? Okay, Mark.
Yeah. Well, connecting to that one, is there anything that you're doing to avoid the no deal option as parliamentarians in the backbenches, when, as I understand, you've got control of Parliament on next Monday and possibly next Wednesday? Can you put in statute that there will be no deal?
Yes, thanks, Tom. I wanted to ask you about the single market, which you may recall is one of my specialities, which you didn't specifically mention. Of course, the government's deal does include the idea about having a single market for there were a number of other proposals that mentioned the single market. And Vernon made a very strong case before we came about how a single market and non-tariff barriers are far more important than customs union in facilitating trade. So I just wanted your assurance, as someone who will be around the negotiating table, that you will take the single market seriously, considering that it's something that I've given my political life's work with that, so I'd like to see it still there.
Thanks so much, Tom. I was, well, two things if I may. One is, what are the questions on the ballot paper from our point of view, their point of view? But secondly, we've spent a lot of time today talking about the left behind, the excluded parts of the country, and the English regions in particular, who don't have a voice a lot of the time. The household income is much lower than London. London gets the lion's share of funding. And I just wondered, as a party that believes in federalism, what have you got views on that?
Okay. Right, so the first question was, will we regret it, perhaps not voting for the Prime Minister's deal and actually securing something? Well, there is a risk that if we don't vote for the Prime Minister's deal, that we might end up with no deal. That is true, but I would equally argue that there is always a fail-safe, and that is revoking Article 50, which we can do at any point up to the 12th of April. And interestingly, I hear from Conservative colleagues that there are a number of Conservative colleagues who are even more attracted, who are not sort of out there, not outed yet in terms of being in opposition to the Prime Minister, but who are even more attracted to the idea of revoking than they are a people's vote. So it may be that, you know, the fact that there are 160 MPs who voted for no deal and 400 who voted against, that if we get close to the 12th of April without any solution at all, that majority might actually coalesce around simply revoking Article 50. I mean, the difficulty there, of course, is that to do it neatly, we need to do the reverse of Gina Miller. In other words, we argued rightly that Parliament should have a role in triggering it. If we end up doing it at 11 PM on the 12th or the 11th of April, then there's not really going to be time to go through the proper parliamentary process. But I think it should, ideally, it would go through the process in Parliament. But I suppose I don't see it as my role as helping the Prime Minister to deliver her deal. If she had attempted 1,000 days ago to enter into any sort of dialogue with the opposition parties, including mine, she may well have extracted a willingness to support something like the single market and customs union. But she made no attempt. She made a solitary attempt about a month ago, which involved a couple of meetings with the leaders of the opposition parties, and I met the Deputy Prime Minister, and there was another attempt a couple of weeks ago. That is the only attempt. Now, she could have built a coalition around it if she had started, but she never attempted to do that. Right, the second question was, can we legislate for no deal? And that is the difficulty. The difficulty is that it is absolutely correct that the only thing that is certain is that if we don't secure a deal, no deal is the legal outcome. So yes, we do have to try and find a way of doing that, and it is possible that if we come to some sort of conclusion on Monday, that the Wednesday that is being sought again for a continuation of the Honourable Letwin process could in fact be used to find a way to legally bind the government to deliver what has been agreed on Monday, and perhaps also try to do something around ruling out no deal at the same time. Although I suppose if we were to succeed on Wednesday in legally binding into trying to deliver what Parliament had agreed on Monday, that we might not legally need to bind to rule out the prospect of no deal. On the single market question, I agree that the single market is probably the most critical issue because, as you'll know, globally tariffs have less and less relevance. It's something that's gradually gradually being dropped around the world. So yes, I think the single market should be a priority in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But of course, the difficulty for Conservatives in particular is that if the Prime Minister has any red line, it's around free movement. And that is something that I think she might jettison all of the others, but I think that one will be the last one standing. So that presents problems for her. And finally, on the question of if we get into a people's vote, what's actually going to be on the ballot paper? Well, interestingly, talking to a senior government minister last night, they were suggesting that it should be a two-stage process, which some clearly advocated, leave or remain, and then if people are voted to leave, no deal, Prime Minister deal, or no deal, or some other kind of deal that might have been agreed. Personally, I still prefer the idea of putting on the ballot paper something that we know could be delivered, which is the Prime Minister's deal. It's been agreed by the European Union, albeit not by Parliament, and staying in the European Union. I think that's, at the moment you get into a two-stage process, I think the legitimacy of that starts to get easier to challenge. And incidentally, I don't think we should open up the franchise, unfortunately, to 16 and 17-year-olds, EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU. I would certainly argue for it in Parliament if we get there, but frankly, I think a lot of colleagues would rightly perhaps point out that this was loading the dice, and that if you're going to have a referendum, it should be on the same basis as the last time, not adding in people who inevitably would be voting very heavily for Remain. And finally, and perhaps this is the most critical question, and one which has been completely neglected for the last 3 years. People who voted leave 3 years ago, many of them voted leave because they were in parts of the country that perhaps have never recovered from mine closures, coastal towns that have not recovered from the loss of trade for tourism that they lost 50 years ago, where people were crying out for investment. They were crying out for more investment in their schools, so their schools could compare favourably with the schools in London, performance of schools in London. They're crying out for all of those things, and absolutely nothing has been done to address those issues in the last 3 years, because the only thing that Parliament's focused on is delivering Brexit. And I'm afraid delivering Brexit does not allow time, effort and money to be spent on improving policing, improving infrastructure that much, improving skills, training, and in that respect, in many respects, actually we've gone backwards in terms of things like apprenticeships and skills training. So you're right, that is the thing that has been completely neglected, and I think all the political parties, the sorts of things that we've talked about is using the Brexit dividend that we say would be achieved by cancelling Brexit to invest in those areas, to demonstrate that. And we've done some rough and ready calculations about how many extra nurses and doctors and teachers and police officers could be recruited in, say, the 50 constituencies that voted most heavily to leave, if you were to spend the 5 billion the government has spent on preparing for no deal on investing in public services, and it would make a phenomenal difference in those 50 constituencies.
Can I just push back though on the devolution bit?
Yeah, the devolution, well, I mean, I've been in Parliament long enough to remember there was an attempt to introduce regional government in the North East, and I'm afraid the North East rejected it quite heavily in the referendum. So I don't have a ready answer that I think would be appetising to the public and the public would support, but clearly we have got to find a way of breaking up England so that and perhaps city deals are part of that process, but need perhaps to go further in terms of powers and tax raising powers, powers over transport, skills, education and so on that they currently have. That might be the way of addressing those concerns if we cannot get anyone to support the idea of more government. And let's face it, more government at the moment would be quite a hard sell, I suspect.
And on that note, can we stop please? Sorry, no, I mean, you feel free to talk privately if you wish, but I'm conscious of time, I'm afraid. So, can we just thank Tom for that?